Hi, this is Ike from Groovy Entertainment. Today we got a special video for you for Venturing Day. And the day video is Red Badge of Courage, book on record for 1979. So let's get started.
When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a rousing welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. All the men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out and we'll all be there when Johnny comes marching home.
This is your kid stuff read-along book. Every time you hear this chime, it means that you are to turn the page in your storybook. Now we are ready to begin our adventure. Open your book, and we will start the story of The Red Badge of Courage. Remember, the chime means turn the page.
This is the story about a young man named Henry Fleming and what happened to him during the time in our history when the states fought against one another in that terrible Civil War. It all began in the spring of 1861. Henry was in the fields doing his chores. All the time he worked, he thought to himself that his life would be more exciting if he joined the army and fought against the Southerners. After he and his mother finished doing their chores, young Henry walked over to his mother, who was sitting on the porch looking at the stars, and spoke to her. At first, he did not know how to tell her, but after a few minutes, he found the words that he wanted to say. He told her that he was going to join the army and fight for the North. His mother looked at him and told him he shouldn't do it. All night, Henry could not sleep. As he lay in bed, he thought of being a soldier and doing what he could for his country. As soon as the first rays of the sun began to streak the darkened sky, Henry got up and got dressed, and then ran all the way to the town. He went right to the place near the station where there was a sign nailed to the door, U.S. Army Recruiting Station, enlist here. And that is what he did. Henry was rather pleased with himself as he returned home and told his mother, "I've enlisted in the army, Ma." His mother could not believe her ears and began to cry. Several days later, Henry was ready to leave. He bid all his friends goodbye. Then he met his mother at the railroad station just before he was to leave. She was very upset, but told him to be careful and not to get into any trouble. The train ride went very fast, and before long, Henry was at the camp. He tried very hard and learned everything that he was supposed to. Then came the day he was waiting for. The 304th New York, his regiment, was to pull out. Everyone thought that at last they would see some action. Henry was excited. The place that he and his regiment were stationed was so far from the battlefield that they could not even hear the sound of gunfire. They waited and waited, but there was no word about when they would move to the front lines. All they did was practice. They never saw a Confederate soldier or flag all this time. Then one morning, there was great excitement. Henry and his troop were told to break camp. They moved out, but once again, there was no battle. Then, during the night as the men slept, they heard the sound of gunshots. The Confederates were sneaking up and attacking them. At last, they would see some action. Henry was nervous as he watched the guns blazing and men falling all around him. The sergeant was calling out to his men,
Don't run, men! Keep fighting!
Henry was frightened. The battle was like nothing he dreamed of. It was not filled with excitement as he thought it would be. He began backing away from the front lines, and finally he turned and started to run deep into the wood. He ran far from the booming guns. All Henry thought of was getting home. He did not stop running until he was far from the sounds of the cannons. Night was coming upon him, and he was very tired. He was certain that all the men had been beaten back. heard the sound of horses' hooves. Someone was riding through the underbrush. It was some of the officers of his regiment. Henry got closer so that he could hear what the officers were saying. He heard one tell the other that it was a miracle that they had been able to hold back the Confederates, and that he was certain that the men could hold them. Henry felt ashamed. He had run away in the face of danger, while the others stood and fought and won. The boy slumped down under a tree and fell into a deep sleep. He slept soundly, only to be awakened to the sounds of men marching. They were very close to him. He got up and ran towards the sound. There he saw a troop of about 100 men, all wounded. Henry ran towards them, hoping to find a friend among the men. He ran from man to man, looking for a familiar face. Then he saw one of his friends, who looked very weak. Henry ran to him and cried out,
Jim Conklin! Why, you're wounded!
The wounded man focused his eyes and was very pleased to see his friend. Jim told him that they had been fired upon, and that he was shot, and that it was good to see him. Jim was so weak that he was unable to say another word, and he just closed his eyes and fell asleep. Henry felt terrible. All these men had been wounded, and he was all right. They had fought, and he had run away. Henry knew that he could not live with himself if he did not rejoin his regiment and fight. Henry wandered for the rest of the day and night until he heard the sound of guns and cannons blazing. He ran to where the sounds were coming from, and there he recognized his regiment. It was a terrible battle. Many, many men were wounded. The air was filled with the sounds of the cannonballs whizzing around them. The shells were landing everywhere. Henry reported to one of the officers to see where he could serve best. This time he was not frightened, and he knew that he would not run from the battlefield. And he did not run. Henry fought like 100 men. He was not afraid of anything. The other men looked up to him, and he was a leader to them. The battle raged on and on. Henry had enough courage for each man on the field. He fought like a seasoned veteran. The sergeant called to Henry and said,
If I had 1,000 men like you, Henry, we would win this awful war in a week.
When some of the men would turn and start to run from the battle, Henry was right there to call to them.
Don't run! I know how you feel. Stand and fight for your country, men.
During the battle, the flag bearer, who led the army into battle, was hit. Henry saw the stars and stripes begin to fall. He ran to the falling man and grabbed the flag out of his hands. He led the troops into battle, a battle that he and his men won. The tide of the war was beginning to turn, and the Confederates were being beaten back. Soon, it was over. The men of the U.S. Army won over the Confederacy. There was joy as each man knew that soon they would be going home, and Henry was happy to know that he had done his job as well as he could. Henry had been wounded in that battle, and he wore his red badge of courage proudly. He looked around him and said to himself,
I am glad that I returned to the battle. I am just as brave as the next man. I fought for my courage. I am so pleased that I could help my country in my small way.
Henry had proven himself a man.
So that was the Red Badge of Courage for 1979. So please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Have a groovy day with another video coming out real soon.